Lovely. So recording has started. I'm going to start with an opening karakia and an introduction to our guest, Dr. Andrew Cox, and then we will get started. Just to let you know that Andrew is more than happy to take questions as we go. He is quite happy for this to be as much a discussion as a presentation. Nida and Diana will be monitoring the chat along with me, but please feel free to just also don't have to necessarily put in the chat your question. You're more than welcome to also use your microphone. So let's start with our karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Ke mā kina ki uta, ke mā taratara ki tai. Ehi aka ana te atakura. He tio, he huka, he ohu, tihe Māori ora. So, welcome to Dr. Andrew Cox of the University of Sheffield's Information School. Andrew is a senior lecturer and his research centres on the response of information professions to contemporary societal challenges such as new technologies, increasing managerialism, datafication, changing conceptualisations of learning, and a perceived crisis of well-being. So in my career, Dr. Andrew Cox's work on bibliometric competencies, research data management, and more recently, AI and machine learning in libraries has been very influential on my thinking and practice. So TEL SIG is actually really excited that he has made himself available to come and speak to us here on the other side of the planet to where he currently is. So it's a good evening to Dr. Andrew Cox, I believe. And we're really excited. He's come to speak to us about AI and digital transformation. And so now I will actually hand over to him to begin his presentation. Kia ora.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and thank you to the whole LIANZA committee for inviting me to give this talk. So let me just share. Got some slides here. Share those. I think you should be able to see those now. So, as Yvonne already said, feel free to sort of ask questions as we go, interrupt me, because I do talk a lot about this. And I've set myself a huge topic here about talking about, going back in time a bit and thinking about data and what we've learned about data. The thing that's at the forefront of our mind, artificial intelligence, I suppose, but also the idea of digital transformation. I'm not really claiming to know the answers. I possibly know something that might be like a good question, or some of the good questions to ask. And that's kind of the ending point of the talk, is some of the questions we should be asking ourselves. So yeah, from the Information School at Sheffield in the UK. But I'm also a convener of the IFLA Special Interest Group on Artificial Intelligence. And it'd be great if you wanted to participate in that. One thing we've produced is a sort of getting up to speed on artificial intelligence set of resources that we've selected. We thought it was very clever to say 23 resources for 2023. It's not that clever, but it's a list of things we've picked out that we think is a really good starting point. Because I know maybe some of you here are much more expert on artificial intelligence than me. That would be quite easy. But I think a lot of us are across the profession, in every sector, we should be wondering what the meaning is for us, and I think we are, and these resources are maybe a good starting point. And we also have a mailing list, and we're encouraging people to sort of post on that and share resources. So it'd be great if you got involved in a special interest group. So yeah, I've set myself this huge task of talking about data, artificial intelligence, and digital transformation. But I think it's good for thinking about, well, what is the issue here? So over the last decade or more, people have started to talk about things like big data. It's seen as a very promising thing in many sectors. Datafication, or talking about the value of data to organizations, has been a topic for a decade or so. And actually, artificial intelligence critically depends on data. So actually it's part of the same story, really. We couldn't have the applications of artificial intelligence we have now without lots of data. So I think that they are definitely linked issues. We might think of data as quite a simple thing to manage. Traditionally, we saw in our profession, data as sort of like unorganized material prior to we turn into information, and they may be knowledge or wisdom. And here's another sort of kind of technical view of data, where it's just about things like data quality, data security. Well, I was talking to a data scientist really, and they recently, and they said some interesting things about data. They said, well, data is actually very messy, it's untidy, it takes a lot of working with to raise the quality of it. So there's an issue around data quality. She also said experienced data is kind of constantly updating, never-ending data she talked about. She also talked about, and this is a critical one for me, surface data. In other words, we get lots of data, but is it data about the things we really care about? Is it data that is valid, has a valid relation to the things that we think are important, like, you know, well-being, experience, student experience, say. And also surface data in the sense of not really understanding where the data comes from. And that's a common criticism of data science, is that it sort of takes data from wherever it can get it and uses it without asking enough questions about, well, where did that data come from? And therefore, what are its limits? And she even said, this data scientist said to me, she felt distracted from asking the big questions by the amount of data that they were just having to process. This fits in, I'm not going to go through the whole of this slide, but a couple of things I think is really important coming from work around research data management. It's like data isn't a thing. We tend to think of like, oh, data, it must be that spreadsheet. But actually, data is quite complicated. It could be some interviews, it could be transcripts of those interviews, it could be summaries, it could be analysis. So data is kind of not a very fixed thing, it changes. And there's also this sense of, well, who controls data? There's these issues around data sovereignty, knowing who should have control over data in terms of how people are represented, particularly, say, Indigenous groups or marginalised groups in society. So data is quite a complex thing to manage. And I think that's one thing we should feel we've learned from the data decade, as Sheffield calls it, that we've just been through. And I suppose the point of this is that data, one of the key things is, I think data as a word should be something we talk more about in our profession. We talk a lot about information, knowledge, or books, or whatever, but I think we need to think more about data. That's what we should have learned. And also this difficult nature of data. And so then artificial intelligence, as I said, artificial intelligence doesn't really work unless you've got lots of data. So artificial intelligence is not a new idea. We probably, and it's not an unfamiliar idea. We've been watching films about data, artificial intelligence and robots since the cinema began. There have been representations of that. And indeed, if you go back into sort of at least Western mythology, this little figure in the bottom right-hand corner is someone called Talos, who is one of the first imaginations of a kind of robot, an intelligent robot. The ancient Greeks had the idea that there might be such things, and quite a lot of their myths are concerned with human-created beings. So it's not a new idea, it's an idea that's been in our consciousness for a long time, both in terms of like positive images of exciting things that can happen, but also dystopias, I suppose. It's also changing though. So you may not have encountered the Daily Star, which is a very, very awful newspaper in the UK, but it's even got now into the gutter press, shall we say. So here's something from the end of last year. It was saying, first it was global warming, then COVID, then Putin. Now cyborgs could destroy the world. So it's a ridiculous story. Earlier, this is one of my favorites from this paper. It's again talking about these fiendishly clever things that are created by boffins. Psycho killer chatbots are befuddled by Wordle. So it's saying, actually, it's quite interesting the way that robots has turned to chatbots, and that's the influence of ChatGPT, I think, in the thinking. But it's also saying these artificial intelligence is not really that intelligent, which is probably quite a good message. Inside the paper, actually, there's quite a good explanation of artificial intelligence, but it is something that's kind of very much in the news, so unavoidable. And certainly, and I apologise, these are UK references. I didn't feel confident enough to talk about maybe the New Zealand context of how it's been responded to strategically. But if you look at, there's a UK national strategy, there's a Scottish strategy, there's been updates to that very recently in terms of regulation. The National Health Service has an AI strategy. Our funders have a strategy. And JISC, who are sort of like technology lead for our education sector, they've got an AI strategy. So it's not something we can avoid, I don't think. We've got to have some sort of response to this because it's a strategic priority for so many bodies and organizations. So how is AI really going to impact libraries? Well, my feeling is it's going to have quite a wide and deep impact. For example, in our everyday work, like a lot of knowledge workers, we're going to be doing things like using translation tools, which are based on AI, summarization tools, creating lay summaries. All these things that ChatGPT, for example, is very good at. They will change how we work on a very basic level. We can also see AI in back-end library operations. Up until recently, we might have said, well, what are the two main ones are number three. One is in knowledge discovery. So suppose I've got a huge collection of photographs. I can't realistically categorize them individually, manually, but AI can do a good job of sort of to a reasonable percentage accuracy of identifying things, objects, people, maybe some text in the images. So it can actually provide ways to navigate content in a way that we couldn't do before. And I think that would be, until recently, I would have said that was the main way that AI would be used in our work. It can be applied to text, it can be applied to oral history interviews, audio. And also sort of chatbots that seem to be, even before ChatGPT came along, much more talk about chatbots in terms of things like offering an inquiry service, or other more specific functions like supporting somebody through a process of doing something like, interlibrary loan. So I think there's activity in the area of chatbots. A couple of other areas I think are really important that I do want to mention. One is number 4 is like, so increasingly, particularly in, say, education institutions, there are more and more people across disciplines who are data scientists, who are using artificial intelligence methods, and they need support in finding data, in understanding copyright issues, in preserving data in the long run. And I know in my own institution, there's a lot of activity, particularly computer science, engineering, but across social sciences, humanities, many scholars starting to use these techniques. And we're going to see more and more of that because it's important in the workplace to learn about these things. So as well, there's a employability angle to this, that educators will want to develop these skills. I think we're going to see more and more need for libraries to support data scientist communities. And then another dimension of this is, of course, in terms of information literacy, we need people to understand the results of the searches they do. Google has used artificial intelligence for a long time, but we're going to see a changing picture there. And part of information literacy has got to be data and AI literacy. Then there are other uses as well, but I think in a way, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of applications of AI that will change our work in important ways. I can't really avoid mentioning ChatGPT, even if I wanted to. So it's doing lots of things. We know it can do some fantastic, amazing, sort of almost miraculous things of, writing a long piece of text just on a short prompt, but also writing code, blah, blah, blah. And maybe for us, maybe the biggest effect could be that it's offering a new paradigm of search. We're familiar with having to try and catch up with Google to provide like a clean search of some highly relevant results to any search. But ChatGPT is offering basically not a list of resources, is offering an answer. And probably that's what users want. So how do we respond to that? How do we provide anything like that? So I think that might have quite a dramatic effect on our work in that sense. Of course, AI has lots of, I haven't mentioned any of the issues around the ethics of AI. And I think ChatGPT actually neatly encapsulates nearly all of them in terms of bias of content, inaccuracy, like hallucinating answers to questions, making up references if it feels like it. There's all sorts of biases in terms of maybe language. We don't really know how it works exactly. So although the company that runs it is called Open API, it's not an open company. It's not open access or open source product. So there's an element of like, well, and this is a common feature of AI, it's like we don't exactly know how it's categorizing things. We know it's based on a certain level of exploitation, that in order to detoxify the corpus it was based on, it relied on some very low paid people in Africa to do that work. It's already the object of suits on copyright grounds. It's always going to create a digital divide in terms of the people who can pay to subscribe to the best service versus those who can't. There's environmental impacts, and ultimately it's yet another stage of placing more and more power in the hands of the tech companies. So I think all those issues that neatly revolve around ChatGPT apply to all artificial intelligence applications, actually. If that wasn't scary enough, what I would recommend if you really want to be frightened is to look at Copilot, Microsoft Copilot. This is basically applying ChatGPT in the Office suite of documents. It does a lot of amazing things, at least according to the video about it. But I imagine this sort of thing is coming. It will probably do things like be able to take a Word document and turn it into a PowerPoint presentation and allow you to tweak it a bit, and it'll be pretty good. It'll do a preliminary analysis of quantitative data and write a narrative and help answer questions about how it did it. So there's a scarily powerful version of ChatGPT that's going to come into those sort of everyday office applications that we're probably using. And again, I think there's a load of information management questions about this. So it's like, yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to do all this work for us, but we need to be very careful about the errors it creates, and not that there'll be systematic errors. For example, it's very good at, apparently in meetings, it can provide a summary of what people said, but I think it will misrecognize some people's voices and not others. It'll probably have quite variable efficiency about doing certain of the tasks that it claims to do. And it will still leave us with the classic information management problems that I think we've been struggling with for years about silos of information. It'll be very powerful if you've got the sources of documents that it needs to hand. But if you haven't, there's always going to be the politics around sharing information. And I think it will also mean expectations change about how fast the knowledge worker produces documents. And it essentially must contain an element of surveillance. So I think some worrying elements to that as well. So that's my attempt to summarize what AI is about. And so also move on, say something about digital transformation as well. So this is maybe an idea we've been working with a little bit longer, but what it's saying is things like AI and this data revolution are going to change fundamentally how we do things. Digital transformation is really the proposition that we should rethink everything we do from scratch and say, let's not just automate what we did in the past. Let's try and do it completely differently. So there's interesting work about digital transformation. And actually, there's a positive side to this, and I'm turning now to the much more positive side of the story, I think. In this study by EDUCAUSE of digital transformation, of all the people on campus, the chief information officer is the most aware of the idea, but librarians come second. I think we shouldn't see AI as something completely new. It's been around a long time, and we've been adjusting gradually to it already. And it's part of a wider digital transformation, which we can be quite positive about our role in. So I think the key questions that we've got to think about are, what's going to be the impact on our work? Some scholars have said, well, all professions will disappear because of artificial intelligence, which is a little bit crazy. And on the other end of the scale, some have said, it's only routine work that will disappear. But I think it's going to be more complex than that, and there'll be differences by sector. Do we all need to become data scientists and artificial intelligence experts? No. I think there's still, I'm going to come to my main point is really our knowledge around data management could be the thing that we need to develop further. But I think there's also a warning that we should be thinking about in terms of inequalities in the workforce. There have been many waves of optimism about how the IT industry is going to create lots of jobs for women or ethnic minorities, and they've never really come to pass. And I think there is a danger with artificial intelligence that for certain reasons, it will reinforce social inequality. So I think that's a question we have to always have in the back of our mind. But to be more positive, so there's some positive stories here. So if you look at some predictions about what are the skills we need for the fourth industrial revolution or artificial intelligence, whatever you want, labor or digital transformation, or whatever you want to call it. What actually jumps out is actually that it's skills that we do have that are in high value. So if you look at this at the top there, we can see that physical and manual skills are in decline in value, although they remain the largest category of skills needed. Basic cognitive skills are in decline. Where there's a big growth is in basic digital skills, which I think we have developed, but there's also a lot of emphasis on things like communication, negotiation, interpersonal skills, leadership, adaptation. So I think there's a very positive message for us in our profession here, because I think we're good at those things. There's some negative elements in terms of, for example, if you notice there, if you can read this, is quite small, but advanced literacy and writing, that is also seen as declining. But you can turn to other studies, for example, World Economic Forum. They say these are the key skills for the fourth industrial revolution, and digital isn't even on there. And you can find other examples of this. So I think actually we should be quite positive about, I won't go through these slides, I'm sure you can share them later. Digital skills are important, but so are many of these social skills that we probably would feel we do have. So what is going to be the impact of artificial intelligence and this digital transformation on the information profession? Are we going to be, do we have to become coders? Do we are we just going to support this? Are we going to be trainers? Are we going to be managers? I think the answer is all those things. And if you look at this, this is supposed to be a spectrum of impacts of artificial intelligence that I mentioned earlier, things like applying AI to big collections of data, or creating communities, or teaching people about artificial intelligence, part of digital literacies. I think all these changes relate to things we already do. So it's more about updating what we do to a slightly different context. That would be what I would see as the impact of AI. And in particular, I think these things are so important. So finding data for data scientists remains a problem, because search in terms of like texts or journal articles is probably fairly well solved, but finding data sources is very hard to do still, and we're good at searching for stuff. Our emphasis on sharing and openness and interoperability and those kind of fair principles is of value here, because I don't think researchers who collect and analyze data think in those terms enough. So our emphasis on sharing things and being open, and also describing things using standards, that's really valuable. I think understanding the origin and quality of data becomes really important. As I said before, I think data science is often accused of just taking any data it can find and analysing it and concluding that that's the answer to everything. Whereas you've really got to ask, well, where did this data come from? Who created it, for what reason? So those issues about provenance are really important. Data science is also struggling with the idea of like, well, what are the copyright issues around reusing data? And also preserving or storing or destroying data. These are also key issues, even in artificial intelligence context. So I think there's a lot that we can offer in this area. And maybe not everybody in the profession works in this area, but I think it's where we have a real strength. A couple of other things, I think, so we've got knowledge that's highly relevant. I think we've also got attitudes that are really relevant. For example, a lot of AI applications, they are applied because they can be. Whereas we're always asking, what is the user need? What is the service benefit? And that sort of service focus is really valuable in an AI context, because we're asking, well, you can do this fancy thing, but is it actually useful to anybody? And also these collaborative and influencing skills that go back to what I said about social skills being really important. And also we've got the fact that you're here today, we're sharing professional knowledge, and we've got this commitment to updating our skills. Those attitudes are really useful. Not every profession shares its knowledge in the same way. So that's a really powerful thing we do too. In terms of attitudes, I think that's very positive. And I think also our values are highly relevant. Again, I'm quoting the UK library associations, ethical statements. But I think things like intellectual freedom, access to knowledge are highly relevant in an AI context. That we need to keep those values. We've got a distinctive thing to say about the AI world, particularly as it applied to search. There are things we need to understand better. That's on the other side of the slide. But I think ultimately, I think we should stick to what we already know about, what we do, what librarianship has always been about, information profession has always been about, and that's access to knowledge and information. And for each sector, I think there's ways of thinking about, well, what can AI do for us? And that's the question we should be asking ourselves from a professional point of view. It's like, what is the vision of how we want to use AI? If we've got a clear idea of that, then I think the technologists can build it. So, for example, in the health sector, people have talked about living systematic reviews. So the way that if you could build tools that would help you at least partially update systematic reviews on a particular health topic, because there's so much published about every medical condition all the time. So a living systematic review is their kind of vision of what they want to achieve. We also talked about in a paper from a few years ago, the idea of the intelligent library, which we thought was moving from allowing someone to search for a text to read to interacting with the full text of a whole library collection. So but I'm not sure those are the right visions. But I think what I would say for us as professionals, we should be thinking, well, what does AI mean to us? What's our vision of what it should be able to do? So I think that would be the question I would pose to you. What is your vision of a sort of library and information service driven by AI? And I said at the beginning, I was going to there's some questions I think I'm posing which might be useful. I don't know the answers. So I suppose the first question is, how do we scope the issue? Is it about AI, or is it about data and AI, or is it about this wider concept of digital transformation? How does that fit to our existing strategies, and what is a strategic response to AI? And how do we meet the workforce challenge? There's some options there about how we might upgrade people's skills. And what skills do we specifically need? And also, going back to that question about equality and diversity, I think there's a bit of a risk around that in terms of what AI its impact might be on the profession and on our users. So I think I've talked a lot there. I've nearly come to the end of the slides. I wonder if there's any questions. I'll pause there. I've got one more thing to add, but it'd be great if people wanted to.
Yeah, Andrew, we actually do have quite a lively discussion going on in our chat room. Cool. So there are a few questions that came through during your presentation. So I would just like to invite the first, we have a first comment from Carter. Carter saying that they're getting library users coming in with untrue articles and fake book references which have been hallucinated by ChatGPT, and that seems to be one of the big challenges. So Carter, would you like to unmute your microphone and join us and maybe discuss that briefly? And also we do have questions coming through in terms of again, ChatGPT sort of influencing the colonial narratives online, but also the effects of AI onto Indigenous sort of matters, like in New Zealand, the Treaty of Waitangi, of course. And then also looking at, you know, a lot of IT companies now laying off staff, especially from their IE and ethical teams. So would anyone like to join in and ask their questions directly and discuss this with Andrew?
Hi, it's Wayne Carter here. I put the question in about hallucinated
Hi,
references.
Wayne. Yeah.
Hi there. I was just wondering whether many other people are getting that. And whether Andrew's heard about that.
Yeah, it has been widely reported. Yeah, making up references that look highly plausible and making up ideas as well. I think my response to that is, so I think people or students say are already using a lot of AI tools. They're using things like Grammarly, Google Translate. They're going to use ChatGPT. We can't really stop them. What we can do is make them think more. We have to actively sort of talk about it. And we've got to point out the problems so that students can work out, well, what is an appropriate use. I think they're probably pretty confused. The more we just sort of say we can't use it, that's not really going to help. So what is appropriate use? Make them think about, well, how do I use this effectively? So it's like one of the slides I skipped through is talking about a real skill of the future will be, how can you talk to AI to get the best response out of it? Very like, how do you do a good search and get a good result? So I think we can help people to use it better, and they'll value that. We can point out the ethical issues, and maybe that will have an effect on whether they want to use it. So I suppose my message would be, we've got to get out there and start talking about these tools and not deny that they exist. We can't deny that they exist.
Thanks.
But other people may have much better ideas about the answer.
Morgan, you said your subject librarians are already dealing with this issue. You know, how are they dealing with it?
Sorry. What
Hi,
I meant was
Morgan.
hi, how you doing? I didn't know you put me on the spot, Neda.
Of course I will.
I just heard about that a couple of weeks ago from one of our subject librarians, and she said, "Oh, we've sort of been trying to find a reference for a student, and we couldn't find it, and we had to sort of question a lot to finally find out where he actually got the information from and finding where he was." So that was the first time I was exposed to it. I guess this is just more, it's very new for us as well, so they're just explaining to them you can't trust it, you can get information. I was just going to type about, on a positive note, in my study group, I have one of our group members who actually uses the ChatGPT, but to just find a bit of information to start something. So she was telling me yesterday that with this area that we research, and she was putting all the keywords that she thought that would be relevant, and she couldn't get anything from our databases or anything on Google. While she put it in ChatGPT, she got the right terminology. And then she went back and looked at databases and found the information. So I guess if we use it correctly, it could be quite helpful. I have to admit, I have not used it yet, but I am very tempted to go to log in and just play around and see what I get.
Thanks, Morgan. Okay, we have quite a few more comments coming through. Catherine, would you like to join us? Catherine writes, I have heard that electronic reference checkers are a thing and available for purchase or possible subscription. Our course design department are looking at acquiring for the university. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to not join, but I was just fiddling around on here. yeah. I had heard that these are available and may be used.
Are they actually, I mean, how effective they can be against AI?
Well, they can help an academic identify if their students have, you know, if they've used chat and they haven't done the work themselves, or they haven't checked, or if they are going to let them use it, if they haven't checked their references. I mean, that's part of academic rigor, isn't it? To have references, and so that's, I think, I don't know how it's going to work, but that's the idea.
Yeah, I have noticed the quality of the assignment submissions at the Tertiary Institute where I work has gone up quite radically in terms of quality of academic writing. You know, so you can notice that quite quick radically. And then of course Emma says the in relation to critical thinking ability and development of thinking skills becomes vital as well. So yeah, Emma, would you like to join us as well? So you know.
Thanks, Neda. Andrew, yeah, I thank you for that really interesting presentation. I was just thinking back to critical thinking, which you mentioned quite early on with AI and information literacy, and yeah, developing AI literacy and data literacy. But I think that the part of information literacy, which is evaluating and critical thinking, is even more important with AI tools, or the AI tool, especially the generative AI that's become available. And I also thought it was really interesting how you said, you know, ChatGPT is being a new paradigm of search. And Susan has mentioned that when people are in isolation, people use ChatGPT to seek opinions. So yeah, but as for skills we need to develop, I don't know. Don't know if others have got ideas.
We've got a question coming through from Luckman Hayes. His microphone is not operational, but he says, has anyone followed the development of Core GPT, whereas they say the provided answer, not just drawn from the model itself, as is done with ChatGPT and others, but is based on and backed by Core's vast corpus of 34 million open access scientific articles. And here we have actually a blog link. Andrew, have you heard anything like that? Or has anyone heard about the new version of Core GPT? That sounds scary, that's for sure.
I must admit, I haven't heard of that. It sounds very interesting. I'll have to have a look at that.
Yeah, Luckman, thank you for sharing that with us. I don't think most of us actually have heard that, but yes, why not? Core is open source, so it can be easily used by AI, I guess. And question, yeah.
Can I ask a question to Andrew, please?
Sure, go ahead.
It doesn't kind of relate to what I'm saying, but some earlier comments around, you know, colonial narratives and that. One of the things that I'm interested in, Andrew, is the way that libraries, so we're talking a lot about library, you know, AI's impact on libraries, but we've also got libraries' impact on AI, and libraries as these kind of centres of data. We're sitting on really rich data ourselves, but we need to think responsibly about how we allow AI, if we allow AI, and who actually has the sovereignty or the governance in that to actually say that we should allow AI to use those data sources in order to enrich its answers, its way of operating. And I'm just thinking, you know, for instance, things that are already available openly are already somewhat privileged in the sense that AI can immediately mine that data and mine those stories. But there's other data that the libraries in particular are kaitiaka or guardians of, that for very good reasons, perhaps, we do not want AI to access, or we're guarding this information for others who do not want AI to access. And I'm wondering if you have any kind of insight on that kind of complexity and you know, maybe the kind of questions libraries should be asking themselves around how we feed the AI beast and whether we should be feeding the AI beast.
Yeah, I think that's really an important question. So, yeah, I think libraries have got fantastic collections of material, but of course we need to be very sensitive to the communities that are represented there. Some of the historic language we used to describe peoples was completely wrong. We got that very wrong, I suppose. And I think, yeah, so a lot of the advice on AI ethics isn't so much about the AI itself, it's about the consulting communities, making sure that they're happy with how it's used and, you know, allowing them to control how they're represented. I guess, I'm sure you know far more about this than me, but I think you've raised a very important question. I think maybe, for example, in the UK context, I think we've got a slightly different problem of lots of historic collections, including stuff that's been digitized, which probably represents quite a biased view of our own history, or in fact, a very biased view. So historically, decisions about digitization have been a bit strange, should we say? And what's in those collections is, well, it's the history of our colonial imperial past. So I'm not sure how we deal with that either. So I think it's very tricky questions there.
I also see that Ginger has her hand raised. Do you want to join the conversation?
Yeah, I think we've kind of focused on more of the academic aspect of this topic, but I'm thinking back into sort of the public library sphere and how libraries, beyond creating access to knowledge and information, are also places where you access community and experience. And that's something that AI can only create an experience in a digital environment, and how we often think of technology as a replacement for something rather than just a tool. You know, the concept of the search engine replacing the librarian, but you know, who is there to just help distinguish between quality information and then the rest of the noise that's on the internet, and just kind of to think about how this concept impacts how libraries function within the general community in terms of readers advisory and author talks and other ways that technology can be a tool rather than a replacement.
Yeah, that's funny enough. It's public libraries. I think it's lovely that, because I'm an AUL for customer experience at a university library. We're also now starting to think around those kind of questions, slightly different kind of context, but it's still, and I'm looking to our public library colleagues because I think that you guys are really thinking in this space far ahead of us. We've got a lot to learn there. I don't know whether you have a comment about that kind of thing, Andrew, where, you know, there are limitations to digital transformation, and that there is still a really important kind of well-being aspect, I suppose one might argue, to, you know, real human contact, and libraries as those kind of community hubs.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. And obviously there's a kind of issues around the kind of digital divide, but also, yeah, I mean, I noticed in increasingly institutions are offering well-being services that are basically online, or they're even thinking about, chatbots that can support new entrants to a university or something. So that could be very good. It's spreading resources more widely. But if it's a way of just like dealing with a mass education system, which it probably is, and a way of cutting costs, I think a lot of that driver lies behind AI. So again, I think that's a kind of concern we should have.
Thank you, Andrew. We do have a question from Amanda Cosham. Amanda, would you like to join us?
Yeah, sure.
Kira.
I think I'm quite concerned about how we get a more equitable use of the content that already exists. And I see already that there are some problems with this sanitized, very English, very scholarly, very academic way of looking at content. And I see the huge body of research that is behind paywalls. I'm worried about the increasing tendency for AI to rely only on open source data without any checking. So, Andrew, do you think we could address this in particular ways? Can publishers be encouraged to make their corpus available for AI?
At a price, I don't think publishers are particularly going to offer it for free, unfortunately. I think things like ChatGPT aren't the worst thing in terms of their exclusivity, because I've talked to quite a lot of colleagues who, like, for example, it works quite well in Chinese, other languages, but I think if you're in a minority language, for example, I'm guessing that it's pretty poor. So again, it's kind of creating more of emphasis on English language domination, those kind of things. On the other hand, I suppose there's a positive. One of the real positives I feel of AI is something like being able to translate publications which I could never have read before, because I don't really speak any other language properly. To read something in German and Italian or Spanish or even Chinese that you could never do before, and that's a positive story there. So ultimately, the drivers for this seem to be companies like Microsoft and Google, and we can't really expect them to do things that promote equality. So they need government restraint.
Thank you.
Jeez, Kira, we still have 6 more minutes left. Would anyone else like to join us with questions? There were Paula Esket had a really good comment. So Paula, would you like to join us?
I wasn't expecting that.
Kira.
Well, it just got me thinking that when there was the point made about not consciously not feeding the AI, if we're starting it, then what does that mean? I mean, open source is, sorry, I've got a really poor Zoom set up at my work, so there's no camera. Yeah, and both starving it. What could that mean when we're trying to create equity of access to information? Yeah, it was more a rambling than anything concrete.
So you basically mean in terms of if we actually starve AI, if we don't actually feed it the data or information to it, would that actually create the a larger scope for freedom of access to information?
Yeah, I was just looking at what the calling that Lachlan put up there, and if AI is using open source information, and then there's a conscious shift to not put up information that AI could scrape, then would that mean that access to information is that people are disadvantaged? Yeah, there's probably more technical minds in this group that could just talk to that, but you know, I'm sort of thinking just people coming in and I'm in a public library scenario. How do we encourage people to think critically, search critically, and if that information sits behind a paywall because we cannot feed a machine, what could that mean?
Yeah, Paula, that's really interesting. You know, way of looking at it. Does anyone have you know, has been thinking about these lines?
I think like everything else, it's all about education. It's like having a teenager, really. You can't stop them from accessing the internet or YouTube or, you know, TikTok. But if you give them enough information and equip them with understanding which data is correct and which one is not, then you shouldn't have fear of giving them access. And we can't really control AI. So I think, yeah, providing information and having a place for people to come and ask questions, also sort of having making sure they know where to go to get the information and help could help.
Yeah, absolutely. We are dealing with a toddler, that's for sure. Okay, so we have a few comments coming through the chat room. Would anyone else like to join us? We still have 2 minutes left, so maybe just one final question for Andrew. Avoid the urge to roll our eyes and educate them with patience. Absolutely.
I have one sort of request to the group, actually. So I've developed a bit of a survey that asks some of the key questions. It only takes a few minutes to fill in. If anyone wants to fill it in, I can send a summary along with the slides to anybody who, so you can all see the results. So it just asks a few questions about how you think AI might be applied and what skills you think are needed. So if anyone wants to, entirely voluntary, of course. But
Andrew, actually, we've had a request early on from someone. Would you be okay to actually provide the slides?
share the slides, obviously. Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. So so for folks, Andrew will send the slides to me, and then Anna will help us distribute them to everybody who was here today. And also a reminder, because I know that at least one person has got the time wrong, but the whole thing will be on YouTube as well very soon. So yeah, so yeah, and I'm afraid that it is now 9:59, so we have to bring this to a close. This has been a wonderful session. Thank you, Andrew. It's really set us up for, you know, thinking more deeply about this idea around the impact of AI. And it's a two-way thing. It's going to impact on us and how we do our work and how we see our profession. It's also going to impact, we in ourselves have the ability to impact AI as well, and also how people interact with it and think about it. So this has been really useful for supporting our sector to have these conversations. And I would now just like to, after this wonderful conversation, to bring it to a close with our closing karakia. So unahia ki te uru tapanui, kia wā ki tia, kia mama, te nako, te tinana, te warua, e te ara tākata. Koe ara rongo, whakairia aki ki runga, kia tēnā, huie tai ki e. Thank you, everybody, and especially to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. It's great.